Chapter 3 Monsieur the Cardinal. Poor Gringoire. The noise of all the double petards set off on the feast of St. John, the discharge of 20 harquebuses, the detonation of that famous cannon of the Tower of Billy, which, at the same time of the siege of Paris, on Sunday, the 29th of September, killed 7 Burgundians at a shot. The explosion of all the gunpowder stored at the Temple gate would have split his ears less violently at that solemn and dramatic moment than those few words from the lips of the usher, "His Eminence Monseigneur the Cardinal of Bourbon." Not that Pierre Gringoire either feared the cardinal or despised him. He had neither that weakness nor that arrogance. A true eclectic, as he would nowadays be called, Gringoire had one of those steady and elevated minds, calm and temperate, which can preserve their composure under all circumstances, stare in dimitio rerum. It was one of those minds which are full of reason and liberal philosophy, but at the same time that are respectful to cardinals, an admirable and uninterrupted race of philosophers, to whom wisdom, like another Ariadne, seems to have given a ball of thread which they have gone on unwinding from the beginning of the world through the whole labyrinth of human affairs. They are to be found in all times, and ever the same, that is to say, ever adapting themselves to the age, and not to mention our Pierre Gringoire, who would be their representative in the 15th century, if we could succeed in obtaining for him the distinction which he deserves. It was certainly their spirit which inspired Father de Breuil in the 16th, when, writing these words of sublime simplicity, worthy of any age, "I am a Parisian by my birthplace, and a Parisian by my speech." For parrhesia in Greek means freedom of speech, which freedom I have used even to Messeigneurs the Cardinals, uncle and brother to Monseigneur the Prince of Conti, albeit with respect for their greatness, and without offending anyone in their train, and that is saying much. So there was neither hatred for the cardinal, nor contempt for his presence, in the disagreeable effect which it made upon Pierre Gringoire. On the contrary, our poet had too much good sense and too threadbare a frock not to attach a particular value to the fact that many an allusion in his prologue, and particularly the glorification of the Dauphin, son of the Lion of France, would fall upon his Eminence's ear. But self-interest is not the ruling motive in the noble nature of poets. Supposing the entity of a poet to be represented by the number 10, it is certain that a chemist, on analyzing and pharmacopolizing it, as Rabelais says, would find it to be composed of 1 part self-interest and 9 parts vanity. Now, at the moment that the door was opened for the grand entrance of the cardinal, the nine parts vanity of Gringoire, puffed up by the breath of popular admiration, were prodigiously enlarged, thus quite smothering that imperceptible molecule of self-interest which we just now pointed out to be in the constitution of poets, an invaluable ingredient, by the way, a ballast of reality and humanity, without which they could never come down to earth. It was pure enjoyment for Gringoire to see and to feel, to touch, so to speak, an entire assemblage. Varlets, it is true, but what matter? Stupefied, petrified, and as if asphyxiated by the immeasurable tirades which burst from every part of his epithalamium. I affirm that he himself shared the general happiness, and that, unlike La Fontaine, who, at the performance of his play, The Florentine, asked what poor wretch wrote that rhapsody, Gringoire would have willingly asked his neighbor, whose masterpiece is this? Hence it may be imagined what effect was produced upon him by the sudden and untimely arrival of the cardinal. All his fears were fully realized. The entrance of the cardinal threw the whole auditory into commotion. All heads turned toward the gallery. One could hear nothing but, "The Cardinal! The Cardinal!" repeated by every tongue. The unfortunate prologue was cut short a second time. The cardinal paused dramatically on the threshold of the gallery. As he looked over the assembly rather indifferently, the tumult redoubled. Everyone wanted to catch a better glimpse of him, each one stretching his neck over his neighbor's shoulder. The cardinal was in fact a distinguished personage, the sight of whom was worth more than any other spectacle. Charles, Cardinal of Bourbon, Archbishop and Count of Leon, Primate of Gaul, was allied both to Louis XI, through his brother, Pierre, Seigneur of Beaujeu, who had married the king's eldest daughter, and at the same time allied to Charles the Bold through his mother, Agnes of Burgundy. Now the dominant trait, the characteristic and distinctive feature of this Primate of Gaul, was his courtier-like spirit and his devotion to those in power. Hence it may be well understood in what numberless perplexities this double relationship had involved him, and among how many temporal shoals his spiritual bark must have tacked about, in order to have escaped foundering either upon Louis or upon Charles, the Charybdis and the Scylla which had swallowed up the Duke of Nemours and the Constable of Saint Pol. However, heaven be praised, he had got happily through his voyage, and had reached Rome without mishap. But, although he was now safely in port, and precisely because he was in port, he never remembered without anxiety the diverse fortunes of his political life, which had so long been perilous and laborious. So, also, he used to say that the year 1476 had been for him both black and white, meaning thereby that he had lost in that one year his mother, the Duchess of Bourbonnais, and his cousin, the Duke of Burgundy, and that one morning had consoled him for the other. Furthermore, he was a good sort of man. He led a merry life as a cardinal, loved to be gay with wine of the royal vintage of Chaillot, did not hate Richard le Garmoise and Thomas le Sillard, gave alms to pretty girls rather than to old hags, and for all these reasons was in high favor with the people of Paris. Wherever he went, he was always surrounded by a little coterie of bishops and abbots of high lineage, gay, sociable men, fond of good eating. More than once the pious women of Saint-Germain-d'Auxerre, as they passed in the evening under the windows of the Hôtel de Bourbon, all ablaze with lights, had been scandalized to hear the same voices which had been chanting vespers to them in the daytime, singing, to the sound of clinking glasses, the bacchanalian verses of Benedict XII, the Pope who had added a third crown to the tiara, Bibimus Papiliter. It was no doubt this popularity, so justly acquired, which preserved him at his entrance from anything like an ill reception on the part of the crowd, which a few moments before had been so dissatisfied and so little disposed to accord respect to a cardinal, even on the day when they were going to elect a pope. But Parisians are not malicious. Besides, by making the performance begin by their own authority, the good citizens had had the better of the cardinal, and his triumphant though late arrival satisfied them. Moreover, Monsieur the Cardinal was a handsome man. He had an elegant scarlet robe, which he wore in excellent style, thus assuring him all the women's favor, and consequently that of the better half of the hall. Certainly it would be unjust and in bad taste to hoot at a cardinal for coming late to a play, when he is handsome and wears handsomely his red robe. He entered, then, saluted the company with that usual smile which the great always reserve for the people, and made his way slowly toward the armchair of scarlet velvet, looking as if some more important matter occupied his mind. His cortege, which today we would call his staff, composed of bishops and abbots, followed him into the gallery, exciting redoubled tumult and curiosity among the spectators. All were busy pointing them out, telling their names, each one striving to show that he knew at least one of them. Some pointing to the Bishop of Marseille, Alaudet, if I remember correctly, some to the Dean of Saint-Denis, others to Robert de l'Épinasse, Abbot of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, the libertine brother of a mistress of Louis XI, all their names being repeated with 1,000 mistakes and mispronunciations. As for the students, they cursed. It was their day, their feast of fools, their Saturnalia. the annual orgy of the Basoche and the University. No turpitude but was a matter of right to be held sacred that day. And then there were the mad hussies down in the crowd. Simone Quattrelivre, Agnes Ligadan, Robin Piedebot. Was it not then the least the students could do to swear as they liked, and to profane God's name a little, on such a day as this, in such good company with churchmen and harlots? Accordingly, they took full advantage of the occasion, and into this general uproar there poured a frightful din of blasphemies and enormities of every description from these clerks and scholars, tongue-tied all the rest of the year by the fear of St. Louis's branding iron. Poor St. Louis! How they did devil him in his own palace of justice! Each one of them had singled out among the newly arrived company some one of the cassocks, black, gray, white, or violet. As for Juan Frollo de Molendino, as brother to an archdeacon, it was the red robe that he audaciously assailed. Fixing his shameless eyes upon the cardinal, he yelled as loudly as he could bawl, "Capere plectamero!" All these details, which we here lay bare for the edification of the reader, were so completely drowned out by the general din of the crowd that they were lost before they reached the reserved gallery. Anyway, the cardinal would have paid little heed to them, so intimately did the license of the day belong to the manners of the age. He had something else to think about, another cause of concern, which followed close behind him, and rose to the platform at the same time as himself. This was the Flemish embassy. Not that he was a profound politician, or concerned himself too much about the possible consequences of the marriage of Madame, his cousin, Margaret of Burgundy, with Monsieur, his cousin, Charles, Dauphin of Vienna, nor how long the patched-up reconciliation between the Duke of Austria and the King of France would last, nor how the King of England would receive this slight toward his daughter. These matters troubled him very little, and each night he drank the wine of the royal vineyard of Chaillot, without ever suspecting that a few flasks of that same wine, doctored a little, it is true, by the physician Coictier, and cordially presented to Edward IV by Louis XI, would, some fine morning, rid Louis XI of Edward IV. The most honorable embassy of Monsieur the Duke of Austria brought none of these cares to the cardinal's mind, but annoyed him in another way. In truth, it was no small hardship, and we have already said a word or two about it on the second page of this book, that he should be obliged to give reception and entertainment, he, Charles of Bourbon, to a band of obscure burghers, he, a cardinal, to a pack of scurvy sheriffs, he, a Frenchman and a connoisseur of good living, to Flemish beer drinkers, and in public too. Certainly, it was one of the most irksome parts he had ever had to play to please the king. However, he had so perfectly studied the part that when the usher announced in a sonorous voice, "Messieurs, the envoys of Monsieur the Duke of Austria," he turned toward the door with the best grace in the world. Needless to say, the entire hall did the same. Then arrived, two by two, with a gravity which contrasted with the flippancy of the cardinal's ecclesiastical train, the 48 ambassadors of Maximilian of Austria, led by the Reverend Father in God, Jehan, Abbot of Saint Bertin, Chancellor of the Golden Fleece, and Jacques de Goy, Sieur Doby, High Bailiff of Ghent. There was a deep silence in the assembly, a general titter being suppressed in order to listen to all the uncouth names and bourgeois qualifications which each of these personages transmitted with imperturbable seriousness to the usher, who then gave out their names and titles, pell-mell and with all sorts of mutilations, to the crowd below. There was Master Lois Roloff, sheriff of the city of Louvain, Monsieur Clay d'Etoelde, sheriff of Brussels, Monsieur Paul de Boost, Sir of Warmisel, president of Flanders, Master Jehan Colligan, burgomaster of Antwerp, Master Georges de la Moor, first sheriff of the court of law of Ghent, Master Geldorf von der Haga, the first sheriff of the parkons of the said city, and the Sieur of Bierbeck, and Jehan Pinnock, and Jehan de Mirzel, etc., 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 bailiffs, sheriffs, burgomasters, sheriffs, bailiffs, all stiff, starched, formal creatures, dressed in velvet and damask, and hooded with black velvet cramanules with great tassels of the gold thread of Cyprus. After all, good Flemish heads, with severe and dignified sombre faces, like those which Rembrandt has made stand out with such clearness and gravity from the dark background of his picture, The Night Watch, personages on every one of whose foreheads it was written that Maximilian of Austria had done right in confiding to the full, as his manifesto expressed it, in their sense, valor, expedience, loyalty, and good endowments. There was one exception. It was a cunning, intelligent face, a kind of mixture of the monkey and the diplomat, to whom the cardinal advanced 3 steps and made a low bow, but who, nevertheless, was simply called Guillaume Rime, councillor and pensionary of the city of Ghent. Few persons at the time knew who this Guillaume Rime was. This rare genius, who, in the time of the Revolution, would have appeared on the scene and would have made an impression, but who, in the 15th century, was confined to the practice of low intrigue, was to live in the saps, as the Duke of Saint-Simon expresses it. However, he was appreciated by the most notorious sapper in Europe. He was familiarly associated with the secret operations of Louis XI, all of which was entirely unknown to this crowd, who were amazed at the cardinal's politeness to that sorry-looking Flemish bailiff,